there are probably, I really want to start by saying that there are so many ways that one can debrief an Enneagram assessment. And I'm unsure about whether there are right or wrong ways of doing it. So really what I'm offering is my own approach, and I'm so undefended about it. So all critique welcome as we go. So I'll do a little spell on how I do it, and then we'll have a breakaway for about 20 minutes so that you can think about and talk with each other around what the experience was and what came up for you, things that resonated, things that perhaps didn't, questions that were perhaps arising, and we'll take some feedback on that. Then we'll have a tea break, and after tea we will have 3 additional views on debriefing. So we'll hear from Renata, we'll hear from Marlain, and we'll hear from Karen. So 3 practitioners with perhaps some quite different takes, perhaps different emphases. What really is important is not to be looking for the right, wrong thing, but to be looking at what these different options might open up for a coachee that one's working with. So,
Did you mean to say you will be hearing from Ingrid, Karen, and Marlain?
oh, I am sorry. I think I said, I'm sorry if I did. It was Renata, Karen, and Marlain. Sorry. Ingrid,
No, Ingrid.
Ingrid, Karen, and Marlain. Yeah.
No,
Okay.
but Renata should be speaking. Let's split our time.
No, I really don't think I have much value to add in the conversation. I'm sure.
We know that you do, but
Yes.
gee, it's going to be packed with 3 after tea. So we'll come back after tea, and each of the other 3 panelists will have 15 minutes. And here we hope that they'll really draw out some things that are similar and some things that are very different. The hope really here is to have the widest range of options in how one might do this. So really what I'm offering is very much a practitioner's approach. So it's not the approach of a scholar. It's not an expert approach, but I'm a practitioner as a coach using the Enneagram a lot, and mainly with individuals and some groups, and then also doing some team coaching. I am so very much a learner in this work. And all the time I'm learning. I'm learning from amazing teachers, from the reading that I'm doing, and a lot from the coachees themselves and their different responses. So it's really awesome for me to be here this afternoon with all of my Joburg-based teachers in the same room. So Renata, Ingrid, Karen, and Marlain have all contributed to my journey in learning to use the Enneagram in a way that I think is positive and helpful. So awesome to have these teachers and to be in this community with them. I've been doing this for 5 years. So that's a short time. And so my reflections today are like, what's come up for me in this brief period of 5 years? I think I've done about 1,000, just over 1,000, 1,050, something like that. I've got 450 that I bought direct from IEQ now, and lots of clients have bought them. So do a lot of work with groups using the Enneagram as a kind of an entry doorway. And then a real important thing is like, I am so aware that all I'm working with is the Enneagram of personality. I'm not even working with all of its layers and dimensions, but there's other stuff that one could be learning about. So, I mean, there's stuff in the 4th way, there's magical stuff around the law of 7, law of 3, there's stuff to really, really go into depth with, and I'm not doing that in my praxis. So what could the debrief offer a coachee? And I think I've got a number of messages that I want to offer right up front to the coachee, and that it's a simple, positive, and challenging introduction to a better understanding and appreciation of your own unique way of being. So really a sense of simple, positive, and challenging. And the idea is to clarify and celebrate both the unique gift that you are to the world, your awesomeness, and then look at some possible areas that you might want to explore. You might choose to work on making some shifts, and those could enhance the quality of your being. So the invitation is that the Enneagram can be a doorway for deep personal work. And just reminding people, as we know when we do self-work, be okay with being uncomfortable at times in the process. And I love always drawing people's attention to this awesome idea of Heidegger's, and many people talk of it, that perhaps we are much more human becomings than we are human beings. And I think for my work as a coach, that's absolutely central, the capacity for people constantly to be shifting and these new becomings emerging. And the Enneagram can be a really, really helpful tool to enable people to do that. And of course, one of my hopes always in the work is that perhaps the stuff I'm working on, trying to make a shift in my level of consciousness and become more self-authoring in my life. So there's so many different models around maturity. I use Keegan because it works for me, simple stage model, where clearly you can see stage 3, 58% of the adult population is in the socialized mind, still not transcending the very material world that we live in. And the self-authoring mind, 35% of the population, okay, that's looking quite good, a third. How could we use the Enneagram to assist those people who are in stage 3 to make that move into stage 4? So really kind of looking at that horizontal and vertical axis idea of leadership and learning, where you can learn millions of skills and tools and techniques, but actually the vertical climb is around the journey to the interior of yourself. So whatever model might work for you, I think Keegan's great. And then very important in my work, I'm an ontological coach. So I'm really interested in what's happening in 3 big dimensions of being human. What's happening in language and in what ways the coachee and what way am I as the coach generating reality. What's happened both in the speaking, how do we speak ourselves into the world, but also that issue around how do we talk to ourselves. And by the way, my experience as a coach tells me that sometimes we talk to ourselves in a manner that we would never dream of speaking to another human being. And that's well worth paying a bit of attention to. And then emotions and mood, they have such a powerful effect on our behavior. They're predispositions for action. We act from the mood. And so what's happening in the moods and the emotions and feelings of the coachee? And really trying to create spaces to look at, is the background mood a resourceful one? Or is it perhaps a difficult and ineffective one? I think a lot about moods of anxiety, of resentment, of resignation, whereas the shifts into curiosity and possibility and ambition, are really possible if you're able to do the work. So lots of focus all throughout this process on what's happening in the way that the coachee is speaking and what's happening in how their feelings, moods, emotions are showing up. And then lastly, really being attentive to the body. What's happening in the body, because it is really the embodiment of everything that happens in the languaging and in the moods and emotions. And paying attention to body posture, how the self is carried, the muscle tension of the body, and then bringing people to awareness of breathing. So this is a framework from which I do all my work as a coach. And the Enneagram is such a beautiful way of adding depth to some particular aspects here. So it's helpful to think about, becoming a different observer. What are we trying to achieve in doing an Enneagram assessment? And more than anything else, I think what it enables us to become is more conscious and intentional about all aspects of our unique expression of the human condition. And it's like a map of humanity. And that's why I use the CC to debrief, because on one page, that first page, you see a map of humanity writ large, and it's so wonderfully understandable. And the key is about learning to observe ourselves and without judgment. And in this whole process, which is very often the start of a coaching process or the start of a leadership development course, the absolute key is self-observation. Getting into rigorous, kind, compassionate, very accurate observation of what's happening for you and what's happening particularly in how you're triggered positively and negatively. So as we start developing this self-observation, so we start to see habits and patterns and behaviors. And we see them quite clearly. And a thing that the Enneagram really helps us with is understanding some of our motivations better, and then being able to look both at behavior and motivation, and they're so different. And the Enneagram really, really assists us in understanding motivation. And then ask the question, so is this still serving me? The issue about so much of what has formed us happened when we were very small children. And a lot of those patterns and habits, they're transparent to us. We've had them for so long, we're not even aware of them. So sometimes the self-observation process can draw our attention to habitual pattern behaviors and the underlying motivations that cause us to act them out for better, and sometimes maybe not so good. And then a key thing is to assist the coachee to become aware of observing their observing, noticing what they're noticing. So there's a trigger, they notice the trigger, and then they notice that they have noticed the trigger. And this actually causes a second order closed loop learning response. And we hang on to that stuff. So really helping people to tune in finely. It's if you kind of have a triangulated away webcam that's watching you, and you're watching you, watching you, watching you, watching you. So the awesome thing about the Enneagram is that it gives us so many different avenues for self-observation. And it's the multidimensional nature of it that I think is what is so compelling about it. And there's so many brilliant personality assessments. I like the MBTI very much. There's a good correlation work done between the Enneagram and it. But there's a sense that the Enneagram is not going to tell you you're blue or red, that it's going to tell you you're many things. And you'll walk away from a debrief knowing that there are 5 personality types of the 9 with which you have some distinct connections and which could be really helpful to look at. And I think that multidimensional aspect is so helpful for people, particularly when they're looking at behaviors within relationships, groups, and teams. So I've got this very simple 5-stage process. The first is to send a warm and welcoming letter. So very often I haven't met the person or people at this point. I get an Excel spreadsheet from learning and development in the corporate, and I send off this warm and friendly letter. And first things first is like, clarify this is an assessment, it is not the truth. And reassure that it's not trying to assess your intelligence or looking for what's wrong with you. So particularly if the company is sponsoring this and people have had no introduction, to feel a little, I mean, my thinking style is the 6. I would be yes-butting this, all the way through it. I'm a 6 contra, so in thinking. So I want to explain right up front and very explicitly what it's not doing. And then suggesting like, are you a morning person, an evening person? Think about doing this assessment when you've got a moment when you're alert and you're really able to focus. And then that you can try and set aside like 30, 35 minutes. And if possible, without interruption. But, life happens. And so you can come back, obviously, if you need to. But you'll see on the second page of the CC the time that the person took to complete it. There's a suggestion, and some people have found it, that if there's a long time elapsed, maybe several disruptions, the assessment can be less accurate. It's not been my experience so far. And then also ensure that people understand when they are confronted by the questions, looking at the choices, if there isn't one which you're really sure about, just choose the one that you disagree with least, and get on with it and move yourself through it. Don't sit and agonize. Of course, for some ones, this is advice cost quite into the dark. Then the CC and the report come back to the coach from the IQ9 machine, and boy, is this a wonderful machine. I really can't praise it highly enough. It just works so incredibly well. And over the 5 years that I've been working with it, I've seen a number of refinements and improvements, and I really love that. And for practitioners, it's quite well priced. So I get the report and I click forward, I delete the CC, and then I send the report with a letter. Now, mostly I buy the standard report, which is 24 pages and too long for most readers. If you're wanting to get a team report and there's phenomenal stuff available, then you need to buy the pro report, which costs double that. And that would be an inhibitor for some of my clients. So I use the standard report, I would say, in probably 90% of the time, except when I'm doing a team, when I'll use the pro report. Sorry, guys, IQ9, that's not best adverts, but I'm quite a careful spender. The letter thanks you for taking the assessment and then clarifies that there are only 3 facts in the report. And the first fact is your name, the second is the date, and the third is the language that you took it in. And everything else is an assessment. And therefore you can take it or leave it. It's in the realm of assessment. It's something that has so many subjective elements to it. It's a take it or leave it. And by the way, when you're leaving something, just don't kick sand over it, because you might want to come back to it later. But setting the scene for many people is very helpful. I do a lot of work in engineering and logistics. And for many people, that is helpful. If you're an engineer and you read this, say, okay, this oak's telling you the truth. There are only 3 facts, and the rest is all take it or leave it. And then suggest that people read for what resonates and what doesn't, and normalize both responses. You can find some stuff that you absolutely agree with, find some stuff that you don't, absolutely normal, and suggesting that people break up the reading of the report into chunks, and I direct them to key aspects to cover, get to main type, center of expression, instinct, wings, and lines. Sometimes I find people who haven't read the report, not that rare, very busy people. I will talk about that in a sec. Then in the third stage, this is really my work. So I look carefully at each of the coaching companions. And look, I'm from a former age, I'm 62. I print out a copy for myself in color and make notes on it. For some people, that would just be like crazy. And I so understand it, but I'm not unlearning this because I love it. And my key reference work always in the background is Beatrice Chestnut's Complete Enneagram. It's a stunning book. It's so deep, it's so thoughtful. And so often I find myself before a session just checking something and reminding myself, refreshing, because I think it's got great depth and it's really helpful. Then I'm very interested in working with the tri-type. So then I look up the tri-type and I check the summary description. I'm getting to know them better and better over time, but I check in with it again. And in the past, by the way, I would have printed a copy of the CC first page for the Coachee, and also I would have printed a copy of the tri-type summary from Catherine Forth, and I would have had those to hand. But these days, most I'm working online, and a lot of people don't want any paper, which is very sensible of them. So I think we're kind of moving away from that. But for me, my prep is very much around looking carefully in depth at that CC and making a few notes that I want to be sure to cover. Then it's setting up the session, and I always do it by email. I'm not a great WhatsApp fan. Ask always for 60 minutes, and quite often in the corporate space, there'll only be payment for 60 minutes, but 75 and 90 are better. And then depending on my schedule, if it's a schedule for 60 and I'm able to stretch it to 75 without a charge, then I do that. And then in this process, asking the coachee again, will you be ready to share what resonated, what didn't, and what kinds of issues came up for you in the process of reading the report, just a kind of a jogging of the memory. And then the last thing, getting to the actual debrief. In a moment, I'll go out of this PowerPoint and take you to a CC. So starting with a brief check-in, and really important checking in on mood and body. The person is going to participate in the learning from the mood that they're in. And people who come from a rushed meeting or a day of Zoom, feeling zoomed out, need a bit of time just to connect, calm down, just a moment of silence, a minute or so, sometimes a little bit more than that, but really connecting to getting people into a receptive mood to think about themselves very deeply. Then checking in with what did resonate and what didn't, and the issues that people would like to explore. And very often I'll find people have marked up sections and sometimes with like huge exclamation marks and big crosses in the margins, like me as a social 2, when I discovered that I don't only give because I'm such an angel, but also because I'm thinking about what I'm getting. It's like, whoa, I don't agree with that. I am a very nice person. And then also reassuring people who haven't had a chance to read it. It's going to be cool. I'm going to give you this overview. It's a summary. And really importantly, if you want to go back and read the report later, that's up to you. So I'm operating on the basis that the work, really carrying the work forward, preparing for the session and being in the session, and then what you might want to do afterwards, is very much what a self-regulating adult's going to be able to attend to. That's not my job as the coach. My job is, I think, to create all these opportunities and to create also a mood of positivity and welcome of all these new ideas. So maybe just to stop for a moment before I go to the CC and check if there are any questions. And Renata, you might need to help me. I can't see everyone. Any thoughts or questions?
So if you do have questions, you can click on the raise hand at the bottom or just keep waving in the webcam till I spot you. Get to the one, there we go. Ken, go ahead.
Hey, Getti, thank you. That was really nice. I had a couple of takeaways, and the one I really particularly hopefully I remember is just to remind them that there's only 3 facts in the report. The rest is assessment. That was cool.
Oh, I'm so glad. It just resonates for some people so deeply.
Yeah, that was great. Anybody else? Yes, Anne, and then Caroline.
Getti, did you say that you send the coaching companion to the clients?
I don't at the time. I send the report at first, and then if we're going to meet online for the session, about 10 minutes before the session, I will mail the CC and the Catherine Forbes tri-type summary to them so they can reference them in the meeting.
Okay, because I thought you were never to send the CC. I thought it was a tool for yourself, so that was interesting to hear.
Oh, so that's how.
Yeah, we teach not to send it, but we're having individual practitioners' viewpoints on what works for them. So, yeah.
Yeah, so and that's absolutely right. And Renata taught us that too, and Dirk did too. And I disagreed with him then, and I do now. And as I am the coach practitioner running the debrief, I get to use what I want. And it feels so lekker because I see it working for people. And I don't use the second page of the CC. The stuff around integration, I don't find it helpful. Faking good, faking bad does not land for me in any way. I don't work with it. So I think as practitioners, one of the things we're able to do is to be a bit like learning vultures, and pick up things that make sense to us and could nourish us. And lost the rest, I'm not a guy for the bones, maybe. Fiona.
And another idea is just to take a screenshot of the first page so that you don't actually send the second page. I mean, that might be a possibility.
If you knew how to do it, Renata, it would be really useful, hey? Give me a tip
How to
offline.
take a screenshot.
Give me a tip offline.
Our next session will be on how to take a screenshot.
Fiona, I think.
And Cara had her hand up as well. Go ahead, Fiona.
Thank you, and thanks, Getti. I loved listening to you. They're just so practical and obvious what you were saying. And using the standard report instead of the pro, it just makes so much sense. But everyone wants to go for the pro. They see there's an option to get all this extra information, and then they come to the coaching session and they haven't even read a third of it. So I'm interested, how do you convince them that they only need the standard rather than the pro if it's not going to be a teams thing?
So I don't want Dirk to be cross with me.
No, not at all, but yeah. I'm interested to hear.
But I'm like crystal clear, if you work with a pro, with a standard report and you want more, there's an awesome pro report that you can get, but it's double the size. And one of the issues you're bringing is how little time you have and how much pressure you feel. So let's start with this. And companies are also into prudent shopping at the moment. So my big corporate customers, if they can pay half for an Enneagram report that I'm recommending that is the best one with the hope of being read, they'll go for it. So the thing that the pro report really is excellent for is working with teams. I've worked with an exec team now in a business that's gone from really zero to hero. It's a fourth year of working together, and we're constantly refining and looking at different teams, the micro team that really runs it, the next level, the full exec, the board. And now we're starting to work. We've worked about half of the staff, 120 people. We've got another 60 to go. they're using the Enneagram as their way of understanding each other and making this business really, really successful. I think it's Caro, is it?
Caro and then Willeen.
And then we need to move to the CC.
Thanks. Getti, just thank you so much for reiterating the ontological coaching value of focusing on connecting with the mood. That was really a valuable reminder for me. Also sharing the CC, which resonates again, I think, from a transparency and a partnership perspective, that this is not something that's happening to you, but working together with you. The piece that I'm curious about is the sharing of the tri-type. That's something that I haven't done yet, and would be interested in your perspective on the value of sharing that and how you incorporate it up front. Thank you.
Okay, brilliant. So the tri-type, yeah. First of all, just the thing about the tri-type, the fact that it's a registered trademark makes me incredibly irritated and annoyed. And the reason that it is the reason that it was taken out of the IQ9 early trainings. I think it's a profoundly helpful way of seeing how you can have a different main personality type from somebody else and so get them. So I'm a 268 at the moment. I'm working with someone who's a main 2 and someone who's a main 8. There are moments when we are absolutely at one. We understand each other. Even we understand when we're not being that nice. So really, really helpful in the team group space to see how you can have a totally different main personality resonance and then different connections to others. And then I think the work that Catherine Forth has done on it is very beautiful. I absolutely resonate, sadly, with the fact that I'm a 268, the rescuer. And as I've spent most of my life working in communities, I've pretty much shown that. My son, on the other hand, is a 528. And his 5 and my 6 don't meet. We don't meet there. But in our 2 and our 8s, we meet enormously. So I'm really interested in the possibilities that it creates for connection.
Beautiful.
Similar to, resonant with.
Thank you. That's awesome.
We've got Willeen. You're on mute. We can't hear you somehow, Willeen. I'm not sure why.
I don't know why we can't do it. Let's go to Sylvia, and then we can come back to Willeen if she's sorted.
I'm sorted.
Oh, go. Oh, lovely.
Sorry, it was just the wrong audio. I just wanted to say briefly on the CCs, I work a lot with data scientists, people in IT, actuaries, finance, numbers, analytical people. So interestingly enough, surprise, surprise, a lot of them are 5s. And I never email them because we were told never, ever share it. And I say, look, I'm not really supposed to show you this, but yeah, and I show them, here's the CC, and these are the numbers I'm giving you, so make notes. They love it. And what's amazing is that these are people, statisticians, and that they everything has to add up for them. And so that really gives them a lovely depth.
Oh, beautiful, Willeen. It's exactly my experience. And I work a lot in engineering and logistics. And a lot of the men are like, I'm a tough guy and it's got to be scientific. And they look at their CC, they add up, they see the percentages, they're like, oh, okay, yeah, but I can work with this. And it's magical.
Exactly. Thank you.
Sylvia.
Thank you, Getti, for a wonderful presentation. I just want to ask in terms of time, if you are covering the tri-type, the whole report, usually how long does it take? Because sometimes I have clients who don't necessarily have money and then they will do 1 or 2 sessions, so not beyond the 2 sessions. So you mentioned that sometimes it's 60 to 90 minutes that you take. So covering all that information, I'm interested to find out what are some of the tips that you use to ensure that you maximize the time that you have with the people. Thank you.
I think, super, Sylvia. I think that quite a lot of it is about the experience that you develop over time. And I expect for each coach, his or her own area of particular interest. So I'm really, really interested in the centers of expression and the instincts. And for me, that's really a place where I put some emphasis. Getting to the Hornevians and the harmonics, I generally don't have a lot of time for that in a 60-minute, but I'll highlight it. And again, when I'll show you when we look at the CCs, I try to focus on what's your highest score and what's your lowest score. Years ago, when I was a real baby in this, Ingrid did this beautiful process, and it was all about what's your lowest instinct, what's your lowest center of expression. And woo, it just opened a door for me in my own learning. It's like, oh, okay, I need to pay attention to that like big time. That's what I might be doing a bit more of when I'm feeling more together. Does that answer? And then for me in the coaching, if I'm doing like an 8-session assignment with somebody, we'll work on the Enneagram several times during the course of it. But mostly there I allow it to be client-led. So if the client wants to go back to an aspect of Enneagram, I've got one right now, and we're on our 3rd session of working through a very, very beautiful Enneagram report from Aphoria. Their reports are just beautiful. And it's really lovely working with her in our in-depth. She's now really trying to take some learnings from it, because she's in a process where she feels some transformation is possible. Dave, we can take you, please, and then I'm going to move.
Sure. Yeah, I just want to kind of, this has been just so valuable so far. I intuited sending the CC would be very powerful. I did that with a few clients. I work with a lot of male business owners. And then the whole thing about the tri-type 2 as well, just hearing that, I've been very interested in that, and just the different centers of expression in terms of where you're showing up. And then I take a look at the whole thing. I really love the idea of the whole brain Enneagram too as well. And once you start bringing in this whole map, then you have some people who really are analytical and well-rounded taking a look at this and saying, holy Christmas, I can develop this much. And then it's like, yes. And we start here, right? This is where you unlock. That's your main defense mechanism. So I just really appreciate this for what you've kind of untapped in me here. So thank you very much.
Oh, that's beautiful. Okay, awesome. Thanks so much, Dave. Okay, so let's look at a CC. So starting off, and this is a CC of me. This was my start on the 29th of January 2016. My friend Karen, who's here and is going to speak after tea, took me through the process, magnificent, and did it so wonderfully that I am an Enneagram practitioner today because of this brilliant start that she gave me 5 years ago. And what's important is the 3 facts: the name, the date, and the language, and then moving straight into the center of expression and being so able to say, okay, you can see what your dominant personality style is right here. And so with me, you can see I'm 61% feeling, I'm a 2, I'm external, it goes outward, I'm friendly towards people. I've spent my life working in NGOs, serving people. My kindness is external, so is my manipulation, but I wouldn't say that at this point of the debrief. Here we're at like really headlines. What's the awesomeness of 2? But can you also see that 2 is more than double the thinking style, which is 6, and that's only 28%. And 6 thinking style that's contradicted is possibly a yes but style. And while I'm generating as a 6 my 25 plans A, B, C, and D, quite often there's contradiction, and that's really helpful for me to know. So I'll touch on that. And then if you were to look at this center of expression, you see that the action is very, very low. And later, way down in the CC, when you see what happens when things don't go well, you can see that my competency score is very low. So it takes me a very long time to get into action. So right up front, you can see here what's happening in the 3 centers and what is most and what is least expressed. So quite clear that I'm very slow to action here. Again, the action's external, move against very often, but move towards certainly. People get a sense here immediately that they are not just one thing, and that they have aspects of personality in these 3 types that creates the tri-type. And often I will introduce the tri-type here. I've got very, very short summaries of them, just a paragraph and a half from Catherine Forth. That could be useful. Sometimes I'll get to it a bit later. And then shifting into the instincts, and I think it'd be so nice if this were renamed instincts. I think that people find that much more accessible to understand. And here you can see some quite obvious things about me. I'm strongly a social too. And then I've got a reasonable amount of self-praise in me, but my love for intensity is not great. And for me, that's a stretch sometimes. Some very intense one-to-one relationships, I have to hold myself there because my urge is to run. I don't enjoy intensity. So what's helpful here, what you wouldn't get if you were debriefing from the report, you wouldn't get this information in this form, in this like short, clear, crisp paragraph. I can see that actually I am happiest, as I know, in groups and teams and collectives. That's where I'm in my happy spot. I'm one of 5 children. I've got like a big family thing. Social is my space. Where the edge for me might be is in thinking around this one-to-one part and intensity, and whether in fact I might perhaps give a bit more space and time to it instead of just charging off in the opposite direction. I was away recently and over supper, somebody started to say something that I found really troublesome. In my 20s, I would have probably mown the person down at the knees. In my 60s, I got up and I left quietly, taking some dishes with me from the tables. I just looked, I was being good too, hey? Helping the hostess clear up, but getting the eggs out of Dodge, you know, like run. Then what's really, really powerful, I find, is people having a sense that we have all 9 aspects of these in us. There are those with which we are living all the time. We're living into them, through them, and there are those that we're not doing a lot of. But we can access some things that perhaps we aren't accessing currently. So looking firstly at the 3 actions, you know, you can see that this person, I'm strong in the action center. Huh? So my 8 is strong, my 9's quite adapted, my 1 is strong. And definitely I'm a 2 with a dominant 1 wing. Because later on you'll see, if you look down there, that my competitive achiever is 27. Now, my Enneagram results turn out the same on every single test, but in a different methodology. When I was being debriefed, this awesome guy said to me, so listen, hey, let's talk about you through your 3. Yeah. So either you're like very zen or very lazy, or maybe you're dead. Because I think I'd scored like 1 on 3. And so that for me, in looking at this, is so crystal clear that 3 is my lowest score. When there's competition, I just stand back immediately and do not even put myself, no chucking of even a hat into the ring. Now, looking firstly in the active space, you can see strong representations there. I would explain a little bit about the types, check what reading the person's done, so they get a sense, and just a nice condensed descriptor. And then you go into the feeling, and you just see like, whoa, that 80, hey, you see this social worker sort of committed to others, looking like an angel, actually being full of pride. Don't say that yet. And then very importantly, you see the creative parts also strong. So there's a strong aggregation around the 50 percentile mark in this report. So you can see a lot of things are actually quite strongly present in the person. And then in the thinking space, you can see something really interesting that very much in the 6 contra, which is the yes, but, both wanting authority and rejecting it. And when having a new boss is for me, it was the most painful thing in my career ever. When there was a new boss, it was like, oh my God, I'm going to hate this. I'm going to hate this person. It's all going to be terrible. And then as soon as they started proving themselves, I was like, oh my gosh, this is wonderful. I love having someone lead the team. Because for me, having someone lead the team, 2s are fantastic backup people. Like 2 I see, just awesome, because especially if there's this withdrawal, a little bit of withdrawal thing, you don't want to shine too much. But here's a very powerful way of showing the coachee that he or she has all 9 aspects in them, and you will not get this in debriefing from a report. You just won't have this array to look at that is so simple and so logical, and so helpful as a coaching tool. So I would draw attention, if I were debriefing this one, to look at this fact that both the stretch and the release lines, and by the way, increasingly I'm thinking that they aren't one or the other, they're actually both, is what I'm seeing more and more in the work that I'm doing. And they're both around the same strength. So what's happening when I go to the 8? And what's interesting is helping people to navigate their way along the lines. And I also loved when Ingrid said earlier, we need to get that mat down and start walking it. It's the best. And those big mats, the 3x3 from IEQ9 is just a fantastic tool. The smaller one is great for smaller rooms. And there's a little tiddly 1 meter squared one that's actually really also useful. They're great products and well priced. So you can see here that line to 8, you establish that the internal parts of the hexad for the Coachee. So make that link. And then asking what happens for you when you get into that active controller space. Going back to the center of expression, referring back always, look how low it is. What's happening? Are you slow in coming to act? What happens when you actually do act? Trying to probe to find out what the coachee believes he or she is doing in regard to the 8 now. And similarly with the 4. And you'll see down here that the 4 is also in this 50 percentile of the stack. So it's strong. And I can tell you that straight out. If you were debriefing me, I'll tell you I read, I work in my garden, I go for walks, I cook awesome meals. There's lots of creativity in my life. And I think that quite a lot of my coaching work is quite creative. And then looking at the very low 5 and the low 7. In the thinking space, this is a problem. And for me, often this is a real precaution to go more into the space, to ask more questions, to withdraw and process, rather than to fawn. Because remember, the 2 wanting to please can become very gushing and all over the show. And actually, it should be an STFU and just go home and think about it, instead of gushing and making everyone feel better, and quite possibly saying yes to stuff that you should be saying no to. So really helpful to see the 9 aspects of human personality and to see yourself connected with 5 of them, your mane, your wings, and where you go along the lines. Then if there's a good amount of time, really helpful to look at the Hornevians and to see, firstly, if the person's within the type. So you'll see on the little CC document, you always find the type most associated with the types of compliance. You can see I'm like compliant off the charts here. Give me a rule, give me a law, give me a standard operating procedure, tell me how to do it. Oh, baby, I'm home and dry, I'm complying and I love it. So I'm not going to be any trouble to anyone as well. Hey? And compliance, it's also like a way of sucking up to the teacher. Hey, I'm the good guy, I always do what I'm told. Then looking at the withdrawals low, hey, so that might mean that the client should learn sometimes to shut the X up. You know, when you've got a very low withdrawn score, often people just don't know how to stop talking and being in the space. And because I'm a social too, I'm always in the space. That's my home, is in the space. And then looking at a pretty low rate of assertiveness. The classic 2 thing of saying yes when you mean no. The classic 2 thing of offering to help when you have no resources. That constant attempt to be pouring from an ever diminishing cup as if it were self-replenishing. And then interestingly here, so the only interesting bit of my assessment is this, that I'm actually more reactive than positive outlook. And as a 2, I would normally be associated more with positive outlook. And that's the thing, hey? I have got these really hectic, emotional, real experiences. They're like full body experiences, whether they're positive or negative. But certainly when things are going badly, I'll have my experience, but I will generally express it in terms of positive outlook. Okay, this is terrible. We've lost this, we've this, that, the other thing, but we can still do this. Come on, folks, we can do it. Let's see how we can help each other. What's the best plan? Who's got ideas? But then to get doing. Competency to me is always about those people who sit down on a hard chair and start fixing. There's been like a massive mess. And I'm like reacting, and then I'm going to move into positive outlook. But a lot of people are just hoying here. Yeah, they're just throwing their toys and like screeching. Others are internally reactive. So some 5s are like super reactive inside, but they don't let it out. But then the question, who is that team who get down on hard chairs and start fixing the mess immediately? And you see the link between this very low approach to competency and getting going and the very low action in the center of expression. So very clear linkage around I need a fire, I often say, under my chair to get me going, you know. So really useful. Then just to end, I always go last to the stress and you.
Sorry, darling. Can I just quickly highlight for people what would cause an anomaly like that, where an Enneagram 2 who should be more positive outlook ends up more reactive? It's when you have two of your tri-type numbers in the other harmonic. So for you, you've got the 6 and the 8. So 2 out of the 3 in your tri-type belong to emotional realness or reactive. And so when you've got very high bar graphs in two that belong to the same harmonic, it'll often just pip over the core type harmonic.
That's awesome.
So that would be the explanation. When you see an anomaly, look for that 2 of the other harmonic or Hornevians sit in a different one. So
that's super helpful.
That causes that.
Okay, that's really, really helpful. Thank you. So I think it's the 6 and the 8 that's ticking there. And I always stress how, you know, this is completely contextual, could be different next week. Not that likely, but it's really about this moment in time. I think if I were to take mine now, I'd get probably a similar-ish result. It's like I'm a pretty happy person. I've got like zero stress. I love my work, every minute of it. It doesn't feel like work. I love being with other people. I don't have major stuff. Environmental's good. At this time in January 2016, I did have psychological stress. My partner had died not long before that. I was still in the process of very deep grief. And I have always been going to have some physical stress because I'm fat and I smoke. So that's always going to come out. Useful for people to realize this is contextual. That if you were to take the test at another time, you'd probably get a different result. So, whistle stop through it. I hope there might have been some interesting things for you to gather along the way. And I hope you had a chance also to look at your own CC. Renata, would you guide us? What size groups do you think we should go into?
Maybe groups of 3 or 4, Getti. Maybe groups of 3.
How many are we? We'll be 41. 10 groups of 4, maybe?
Yeah. We could do groups of 5 even.
8 groups of 5?
Up to you.
8 groups of 5 is good. Thank you.
Getti, Ken just had a question. Ken, do you want to just, before, as I set up the groups, do you want to just ask your question quickly and then we'll go into breakout?
Just the big picture question. You went straight to the CC, and I'm wondering if the CC is where you bring the, this is kind of like the cliff notes, and this is where you actually do at least the beginning part of the debrief from, or do you run through the report and bring these things out? The connection to using this is kind of like, well, you did the pre-read, now let's look at the summary.
What's fantastic is if people have been able to spend time on it, and if they can kind of really explore it in a bit of depth of the reading in advance. And then you see some people, they just got marks all over the report. They've really underlined things resonated, things didn't resonate. So for them not to now zoom out and to look at this like big picture view is very easy. Equally, I think for people who haven't been able to read the report for whatever reason, a one-pager is undaunting. And by the way, in some of my work, I work with people who don't have very high levels of education, and they're completely undaunted by the CC. It's so visual, and I think that's really, really helpful. It's so visual and it's colorful. And if you do it right, it's about really emphasizing, so this is your awesomeness. This is the gift that you're bringing to the world. These are the different ways that you can be in the world, that you can show up. And then, okay, look at this, that's so strong. And this is so not expressed. What would it be like to edge yourself into that space for a day or two? See what it feels like. Try it on. But so I don't work with the vices and the virtues in a debrief of this nature. It's so helpful to get to the big picture later. to the holy idea. But that's for people who really want to work with the Enneagram in depth. And then people like me who just love it, go to the COP, and I've done some beautiful work with Ingrid and Renata and Karen, about the ongoing learning. So Donald.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really have appreciated your outlining your approach. I've been taking lots of notes and I really do like the idea of sharing the coaching companion. So I hope that that's something I don't know, maybe I'm looking for permission that we can actually incorporate that a little bit, because I feel like that was kind of like don't do, but I really do love that. I think I would love your thoughts around when you send the coaching companion, if someone decides to turn the page and look at those levels of integration and see themselves on the low or very low, like, I think, how do you help them internalize what that means if they even ask about it? Which I'm sitting in a situation where I have somebody who's a 2 who works with people, helping them process all their emotions and do all that, who actually scored very low. I honestly was quite surprised because I see this person that is incredibly enlightened. And I think that person would actually also be quite surprised. So it would be the one thing I'd feel like it's probably an interesting place to look, but I'm very curious what you do with that.
Great question, thank you. I think I might get assassinated if I get bumped off next week. You probably know why. My sense is that for the thing about this kind of very compact document that people look at, the first page, is you can't get through much more than that in an hour. Then when you flip the page and you look at faking good, faking bad, yeah, okay, so it's about distortion. I can sort of go with that. But the integration thing, I have not found it to be helpful. So I've had a lot of ones, and I queried Dirk a couple of years ago, and he ran some stats for me on it. I had a huge number of ones who were coming out high, I think double guessing the assessment, but whose behavior seemed anything but highly integrated. And I've seen people who scored low and occasionally very low who are pretty together. I'm worried about it being a kind of a diagnostic that doesn't feel reliable or valid. I just feel uncomfortable with it, and I've seen too much kind of disconfirming evidence in my own practice. If people want to talk about it, we can talk about it. I will probably move them straight away from the Enneagram and get into a model like Keegan or one of the other maturity models. Even spiral dynamics for some people, awesome things like that. There are lots of beautiful models to use. I don't think this is a beautiful model, and it doesn't work for me. And my big thing, and I want to say this kind of quite clearly, even if I do get assassinated next week, I'm a 62-year-old adult, and the way I choose to work with something that I've paid for is absolutely my responsibility. And I so feel good about working with the CC because I've seen what magical opportunities and doors it opens for my clients. So, WTAF, I'm doing this. And you'll know what happened if I die next week. Janice.
I also work with the CC with my clients, and how I explain that section is I talk about it as an example of, the orange traffic cones that we see all over the roads. And I ask them to imagine an upside down orange traffic cone, and that we are here at the tip of it when we're born, and that we are unconsciously moving up and around the Enneagram as we evolve through life, and that not many people are at the top. Those people who've worked a lot with coaches or with psychologists might be at the top, and then they're very difficult to type. So they mustn't worry if they're low or moderate. This is an unconscious movement. And now with this knowledge, they will have more conscious awareness and can move to take on the higher traits of each type in different circumstances. And then I also explain the words faking good, faking bad, I say, don't worry too much about the wording. It just means that if they're faking good, it means you need to maybe take a reality check, and you're putting a great face on things, but what are you feeling inside?
Nice
And that's
one,
how I
Jan.
explain it.
Well, I want to be coached by you, Jan, because I love that. Thank you. The theme.
Okay.
Thank you. I think firstly, just thanks so much for the inputs. I'm sort of new to this field, so really enjoying it. But I just had one question in terms of that integration element, just based on what you've said around how you feel around it. Do you include that in the report that your clients receive?
I do.
You do? Okay.
I do, because as Jan has just said, for some it will open a discussion that will be helpful. My sense is that in many of the instances where I'm working, if somebody identifies it as an issue they want to talk about, I'll do that. But I'm very uncomfortable with the classifications of very low, low, moderate, and this the kind of scaling. It's just not borne out by how I, as quite an experienced coach, experience that client. So, you know, somebody recently in a group, there were 2 participants who were low, and they were very together, extremely participatory and welcoming. And in fact, the one was particularly good in including other members of the group. It was like, no. So it's a personal thing. Just by the way, a quick plug. If you're wanting to really understand what is in the IEQ9 reports and CCs, the book really is good. It's like really well laid out. Aha, there you go, Justine. And I often refer to it. It's really a helpful thing. And I thought at the time, oh my gosh, it's so heavy. It's really awesome. And it's well worth getting. My sense, though, is that the really important thing for all of us as practitioners is just do it, and then do it in a reflective way and have someone to reflect with. So some of the work that I did in a smaller group, study group, has just been profoundly helpful in deepening my understanding. And some people like Ingrid and Renata work with the Enneagram at a level of depth that is just absolutely extraordinary. It's such a deep layered thing. And I love that we offer a client something that could be really helpful in taking stock of all that's working right now, how I've got there by observation. I'll notice the patterns and the habits. So taking the client back at the end, observing, looking for habits, patterns, no judging, just finding it interesting, can be very powerful in terms of some self-development that wasn't possible before. Dave, I see you. And I think we have to go in the groups.
Perfect. This will be really short. I just, building on everything everyone's saying here, I've been really using the language, whatever we're doing together with my clients, we're moving to a spot of becoming weller than well. And yeah, that's not good English. I understand that, but the Enneagram just allows us, doesn't matter where you are on it. It's just a spot of becoming more aware, becoming weller than well, getting past that baseline and incorporating even more into you.
That's so beautiful, beautiful. Thank you. Okay, let's go. Are we ready to go, Renata?
We are, Getti, and you have automatically been assigned to a room. Are you happy to be part of a discussion?
No, I'll exit. No, I'll go and I'll exit. No worries.
All right, perfect. And I am conscious, Sabika, for example, is in a noisy place, so she will be in the room but not participating. So, Getti, I've put 18 minutes with an additional minute to come back out. So it'll be 19 minutes in total.
Beautiful. And Karen's just asking, what's the question? It's not a question, it's what are your responses? What landed, what didn't, what questions might have emerged? What did you absolutely hate? What felt uncomfortable? Whatever. But just to try and be in your own feeling, emotion, mood space around it and language it in a way that feels comfortable, and just observe yourself doing that.
And maybe if you saw something that particularly works well for you in your debrief, you can share that gem with your people. All right. So 19 minutes in total. Have fun. See you in a bit.
Tea break, but we have FOMO, so we want to stay. What are we going to miss?
The tea break.
I've started recording again, and I will just leave it on for the rest of the session.
Yeah.
Okay, so those of us who need to take a tea break, is this now?
No, 10 minutes.
No, not yet. Okay.
So at 22, at 16:40, we'll take the tea break until 16:50. And if, you can always just put your webcam off and just carry your laptop with you to the kettle if you've got FOMO.
That's my plan. Okay, so questions from or reflections from the breakout rooms. What common threads did you find, or what struck you in the conversations? Who'd like to give some feedback? Common threads between people? Okay.
I'll share.
Okay, I've got 2 hands up.
Okay, good.
Can we come to you in a sec, Donald? I want to ask Sylvia if you can go, and then Marlain, and then we'll come to you, Donald. Okay,
Thanks,
Marlain.
Ingrid.
Sylvia, sorry.
Yes, yeah, no, thank you. I think for us, the biggest thing was in terms of the use of the CC. So it was just, encouraging that everyone was realizing that the CC is very important. And for some was the comfort of saying, you can use it in your preparation. You don't necessarily need to send it, but you can use it in your preparation. And during the session, you can actually, talk about it, show that you are an expert. You can talk about other things that are not necessarily in the report, but it shows that, you understand the CC. So for some, they were saying they are comfortable to send it to the client, but for others saying, no, you don't have to send it. You can use it in your preparation, and then also use it just to share your insights. Thank you.
Thanks, Sylvia. Thank you. And Marlain, where are you? Your hand right here.
Thanks, Ingrid. So I think a real common thread was just how eloquently and brilliantly Getti presented, and particularly the use of, which seems to be a thread, the coaching report. So I think it's something I used to share with the client, but haven't recently, and definitely see the value of reintroducing it. The other thing that we spoke about was the question of the integration model, and just feeling it's a little bit uncomfortable around using it. And actually, when I talk a little bit later on, I'm going to talk a bit about how I use it, but also should we include it, should we exclude it? And that was a thread in our group.
Cool, thank you. That's great. Look forward to hearing about that. And then Donald and Krena.
Yeah, sure. If I may, my name is Danelle.
Sorry.
It's okay. It's okay. I think a lot of things that have already been said that I would have shared earlier, but the part that Janice shared about, we're born and we spend our life on this journey of integration and, bringing in the good of all the different types. There was something about the way that she articulated that I was like, that is so beautiful and so powerful, and opens up the Enneagram for people to really pull from all the beauty it has to offer.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. Who said, who are you referring to in your group?
Janice, I think. She said it in our big group earlier about when we were talking about the second page on the integration. And she talked about how we kind of are like, becoming more integrated through the journey of our life. And so we start at the lower part and kind of like work our way up as we become more self-aware, right? There's a journey of self-awareness that is the other side of that integration.
Yeah.
I don't know. Janice is probably somewhere, and I was like, I'm going to go back and listen to this just to hear her say that again.
Thank you. And Krena?
Thank you. I think a common thread with us in our small group was the usefulness and practicality of the centers of expression. And it seems to really land with people. People can relate to it. And especially coming from working in a corporate space, it's very often how people are experienced, right? So it's feedback they've received in different ways. And that seems to be really useful.
And can you give us a little bit more detail on that? Like, how would you debrief that, the centers of expression? In the same way as Getti, or any differences?
Very similarly to Getti, in that I would talk a little bit about what it means if your action is an 8 versus an action of a 1, what that would mean, or an action of a 9, inaction of a 9 or whatever. But also just that this is the way the world would experience you. So they may not experience, for those who are very low on the feeling, they may be experienced as being relatively absent from an emotional perspective. And therefore, if there's a crisis, there might be a missing in the connection piece. So that could be helpful. And, how do they find that works with the team? And, so it would be a conversation around that. But I also love that, sorry, now I'm rambling, but I loved what Getti said around speaking around external, internal, and contra. So the contra is my learning space on many of the types, but the external and internally focused, I have found finds resonance very, very easily, which is lovely.
Absolutely. Yeah. Cool. Thank you for that. That's helpful. And Getti, I hope you're taking in this appreciation, because we also started our whole group talking about what we so loved about your way. And yeah, so
thank you very much.
Wonderful. And Stephen's hand is up. I hope I'm not missing anyone, because there are 2 screens here. Stephen?
Thanks, Ingrid. Can you hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yes, one of the themes also from our group was we appreciate Getti for officially authorizing us to use the CC. Because it's something that we are inclined to do anyway, and we all found it very useful, and we wanted to use it, and I have used it, but I'm also mindful of coming from a psychologist and psychometric sort of ethical background, how it can be misused and abused. So there was a concern about that. One of the other questions that came up was about, and also in terms of the percentages, because I've seen somewhere in the report, I don't know if it's page 14, and it has to do with in the section of the centers. If you have your wing, whatever your particular wing preference is, might even be a lower percentage than the other side of your core type. And so the percentage is misleading, because it doesn't necessarily mean that it's your wing if it's a higher percentage. Any insight on that?
Renata's the one who can speak to that, because she teaches the debriefing and knows the technicalities behind that.
Yeah, I don't work with the wings personally, and the report doesn't report on the wings, and the bar graphs are not an indication of the wings. So the report just reports on what would the influence of each wing look like, and understanding that we have access to both, and we might be leaning into one more than the other, and there is an opportunity at times maybe to consciously harness more of one wing for a particular need. But yeah, so I don't think that the bar graphs are an indication of what the wing is particularly. I think situationally you might notice one wing perhaps playing a bigger role. We also can understand, if you all recall the dilemma scissors exercise, that sometimes, I know for me, I can understand the competing polarity of my wings, and how a lot of the dilemmas and things that I grapple with are caused. So I'm a 3, and very often this thing about needing to do something considering others versus me, for example, plays a role that pulls me apart, and I grapple with. So a lot of my dilemmas are around that. Am I doing it in service of everybody else? Like, I've recently moved to Cape Town, and it took me 3 years to get there because, am I going to do it for me, or am I going to stay for everybody else that needs me to stay, including the dogs that need the big garden? So I stayed in a big expensive property for the sake of the dogs, rather than what I wanted, which is to downscale to a small place. So that, I often notice the tension that my wings cause, rather. But I'm not sure that there's a correlation between the bar graphs and the wings. I don't know, Steve, does that answer or help? Or have I misunderstood?
Thanks, Renata. I think maybe my question is, do those percentages on the CC page are they a risk for misinterpretation by the client?
Oh, hell yes. And that's why we teach not to share it with the client, so as not to confuse them and have them be lost in numbers. But I think what Getty's suggesting is, and I'm neutral here, I'm not going to be seen to be endorsing or denying, but what I think Getty's suggesting is that with guidance from you, so he's only shares it with the client 10 minutes before, or you may never send it to the client, but just on a Zoom session reveal it. Do you know what I mean? The first page of it. So a client has no way of making sense of it on their own anyway. It's meaningless to a client. It's only helpful with your guidance and illumination and elucidation. So I think on its own, it could definitely cause confusion, and that's the whole reason why we advise people not to share it with a client, is because the client could just get completely confused with data that is really only able to be translated by you, the coach.
Thanks.
So Getty, is it time to feed the dogs? So please, for those of you who need to take a break, do so now. And Ingrid's going to keep going because she has more stamina and less self-preservation instinct than I do, and I perhaps do. So take a break if you need to. Look after yourself. Do what you need to do. And thanks, Ing, for continuing the conversation for those who want to stay. Otherwise, so 43. So we'll be back at 5:02. So that's a 12-minute tea break. So back at 55 past, whichever hour you find yourself in. And stay and ask questions. Ingrid is one of the best sources of Enneagram wisdom you will encounter on the planet. So if you've got Enneagram questions, take advantage of your chance now. Otherwise, you have to pay top dollar to have a private showing. Amanda's got her hand up.
Amanda, where are you? Oh, there you are. Cool.
Hello, Ingrid. It's something I'm really glad I can ask in this forum in case anybody else also has some thinking around this. But I've just received last week a new client who has, on the bar graph on his coaching companion, is a 1% difference between an 8 and a 1. And 1% is 88 and 89%. So in terms of which one we debrief, I would obviously go with, what the report says, because you can't necessarily pull a whole new report based on the one. But my instinct would be to offer up other resources, from B. Chestnut's books, Russ Hudson's books, a lot of other resources for that client to read, the 1 as well as the 8, and then kind of come to me with which one they resonate the most with. I just wondered if you had any thoughts on that.
So I can chip in on that as well. Just sorry, Ing, to jump in. When there's a 1% difference between the two highest, what that means is that both types, because the questionnaire is first testing to see for core type, and what that means is 2 types have come out strongly. And when that happens, the questionnaire automatically spits out a series of questions designed solely to separate those 2. Are you more this or more that? Are you more this or more that? And it goes on and on. So you can be pretty certain, particularly when you see that 1% difference, that the core type is correct.
Okay.
Yeah, so don't be put off that it's so close that it might be wrong. It's designed to separate it, and the strongest bar graph, yeah, well, there would have been a whole series of questions just designed for that.
Yeah. Thanks, Renata. No, I 100% know that the test is accurate, knowing this person. But in terms of a deep dive into development and, access points and that sort of thing, you want to kind of, I don't know, my instinct is to invest time in the core type and then explore the other types as well. But it's like, this person I know them very well. So it's they are both an 8 and a 1 almost at the same time. So it's a bit kind of schizophrenic in terms of where do I focus the effort on debriefing and without confusing. If I had a year or two to coach this client, it would be different because we would have time to go into the 2 types. But I'd rather just focus the attention on the one that makes the most sense to them.
Yeah, so I think on the technical side of the report and how it works in terms of that algorithm, that's really helpful, that the 1% is very meaningful. But when I see a very high score on something else, I usually do mention it. Like, I'll say you've also got a lot of this on the bar graph, and that usually looks like this in the instinctual variant of that as well. I think it is helpful. I usually make a little pack for people, actually, with a lot of supplementary stuff, subtypes, the things that I've created, if people want to go deeper. So I think, that's the right instinct, is to give them a bit of an understanding, because they obviously did choose a lot of 1 options.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. That is helpful.
Jill, your hand is up.
I just want to continue this discussion. And maybe this question is for Renata, I'm not sure if she's gone, or you could also, I'm not sure if you are able to help with this, Ingrid, does the additional questions to test the variance in order of kind of percentages apply to other areas which are not your main type? So for instance, in your centers of expression, they obviously tell you this is your thinking type, this is your feeling type, but sometimes your thinking or feeling, there's like 1% difference between 2 types for thinking and feeling. So I'm just wanting to know what IQ9 does with those scores.
I think on the technicalities of the report design, Renata's the one who knows how it works. I'm not such a big fan of reports in general. I like people to try different reports, and that's just a point of departure. And let people go into more discovery. Renata, are you there around the algorithm? Jill had a question around that splitting of choices. It happens down the tree as well, hey?
What do you mean, down the tree?
So you mentioned
of questions.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes, so it's a responsive reactive questionnaire. So depending on what you answer, you get a different question. But were you asking about percentage difference in the bar graphs between the tri-type styles?
Yeah. In thinking styles, sometimes there's like 1 point difference. So I've been trying to figure out, am I this or am I that? I think I know what I am, but I'm just wanting to know if you mentioned that your main type, additional questions get asked to help sort that, but does that happen for the centers of expression?
Yes, yeah. So I think that there's quite a lot of rigor in all the different questions to determine. But when you do see a 1%, it's great to look at that. If like you're a 1, if you've got a 1% difference between a 5 or a 6 thinking style, it's a great question to live into, and to perhaps just as a coach hold in your awareness and notice. If perhaps you're seeing a lot of the other one, or so I would just, it's an interesting and valuable piece of information that as a coach we can hold. Yeah. And I've just yesterday I was working with an executive team, and there are no 8s in the team. There's 4 self-preservation 3s, And the 1 has got that 1% different with 8. So she's got the most 8 in the team. And she is the most confrontational in the team, you know. So, and people are going, wow, she doesn't look the same as the other 3 3s, you know. And she's the one that rocks the boat all the time, and she is not afraid to go into conflict, and she challenges the system. And it's like, well, yes, she's so, you know, when I got to explaining all the types and introducing all the types, it was their first Enneagram session. I was like, well, we don't have any 8s in the team, but Nicolette's almost an 8. You know, it's so close. So yeah, it's always good information when you see that to hold in your awareness. I hope that helps.
Yes, very much. Thank you.
And also along the lines, like I worked with someone who couldn't figure out whether he was a 1 or a 4. So we just worked with that and we explored it and we went back and forth. And, you know, he took the time to figure it out. And he came on one of my 4 courses and he realized, no, he's not a 4. And then he, or the other way around. No, he realized he's not a 1. And he, yeah. So that stuff is really, really helpful to just take the time, maybe share some other information and be with it, you know, and notice, as Renata's saying, just keep it in your awareness.
Ingrid, I think we can take one more question and then we could usefully move into the next section, perhaps.
Okay.
I think Jill had her hand up.
I'm not sure if this is a question, but it is an experience. So I've, on my personal Enneagram, I took it 17, came up 9, take it 2 years later before a team Enneagram training, and I came up 7. And I was seated at a table full of 7s. And yeah, that is my second most expressive, but I can tell you after spending a week at a table full of 7s, I know I'm not a 7. So it was, so I don't know how that can be turned into, you know, a question or an exploration, but maybe just to maybe ask somebody to embody that second highest score for a period of time and say, well, does that resonate, or embody both, or really step into it and say, which one really speaks, you know, which one do you know? And raised a hand. Yeah.
And when I first did mine in 2014, there was a 4-degree difference between the 7 and the 8. And mother still today, who did the assessment, says I'm an 8, but the 8 likes more. They want, you know, much more. 7 likes variety. So I know I'm a 7 because I like that variety. I'm like a butterfly going from one thing to the other. But I literally can feel if somebody triggers me, I switch to the 8. I can feel it in my body, you know, that don't fuck with me.
Yeah, and then different teachers have different approaches. Like Mario Sikora doesn't work with wings at all. And he says if you're a self-pressed 7, then you've got you know, then you look like an 8. So, and if you're a sexual 7, you've got the 6-ish side to you. So, and you know, Rania and B don't work with the wings really. Other teachers do. Tom Condon is very specific about the differences between different wings. So, you know, as you get deeper, you decide which teachers you'd like to work with more and absorb their approach. So I think that's also fine. Now, there are many different ways of working with this thing. There are different names for the types. And you've got to like make it your own as a coach and a facilitator and see what resonates with you from as many different teachers as possible.
Thanks, Ingrid. That was awesome. And thanks for your generosity in staying over tea. So now we have the opportunity to hear from 3 more coaches. Each will have about 15 minutes to talk about how they do it and to share with you their practice and give you an opportunity to look into a different way. And the first of the coaches to speak is Karen Michinski. Karen set me on this path almost 6 years ago, January 2016, and it's been awesome. And she is very, very experienced. So Karen, over to you.
Great. Thanks so much, Getti. And thanks so much for your debrief. It was really beautiful. Just to have some confirmation, to also have some lovely new ideas. So my approach is very similar to Getti's in many ways, but I thought it would also be helpful for me to talk you through the steps that I follow and the kind of the practical side of it. So after they finished the report, I only get it sent to me and not to them as well. That's an option. And like Getti, I give some instructions for what they should focus on. So it might be, just scan through the whole report. I like to ask them to focus particularly on pages 6 to 11. Because some people, it's just they read the first page in detail and that's enough for them. And some people go in too much detail, but the pages 6 to 11, strengths, weaknesses, blind spots, instincts, are a really great lead in for them, even if they don't read the remainder up until page 23. I adopt a very coaching approach. So it's very much a conversation. What I don't want to do is an information download of just talking, because it feels like then it's not their stuff. It's me doing it to them. This is you, as opposed to this is how you answered it. So this is what came up in the way that you answered it. Where are you with that? How do you resonate? So they're owning it all the way and seeing the connection between this is my experience, or this is an example I have. Now I understand why the report is indicating this or that. So the first thing I ask them is if they've read it, and it's not an issue if they haven't, but I want to get a sense of if they've started to look at it. And I ask them, how was the process for you? How was the process for you? The actual process of completing the questionnaire and reading through your report. And then you start to get a sense of, oh, this is me, 100%, or, well, I'm not so sure. So you get a sense of resistance or a sense of absolute buy-in, and that helps you to tailor how you approach your way in.
Karen? Oh dear.
Karen froze.
Yeah, and she's disappeared.
She did have some Wi-Fi issues earlier. I think she dropped off briefly.
All right.
So let's maybe talk about, what's already stood out from what she's saying. That, what was the process like for you of answering?
And then I
Really
asked,
good question.
What resonates with?
I think Karen maybe didn't realize that she'd frozen Getti. Let's see, she's still here. No, she's dropped off. All right, I'll give her a ring, Getti. Maybe we should move to our next panelist.
Let's do that, and let's go to you, please, Marlain. Marlain is amazingly experienced, amazingly trained, done the massive Risa Hudson course. She's like, woo! So listen up, folks. Here's somebody who actually knows what she's talking about, unlike me.
Absolutely not, Getti. You were.
Sorry about that. Have you gone on? Have you gone on to the next person, or can I pick up where I was so rudely cut off?
Oh,
Marlain,
you're just in time.
Yeah, just in time. Okay, Marlain, please hold for a sec. Karen, okay,
Sorry.
back to you. Awesome.
I just lost connection.
No worries. 9.5 minutes remain.
Okay, so I then take steps back and I make use of the picture that's in their report. Oh, now you're not going to see. Oh goodness, the picture of the circle, with all the lines and whatever. So I hold that up quite a lot, or if I'm feeling technologically inclined, I might share it with them so they have the visual of it. And I like to use a metaphor of that the Enneagram is like, these are all of the rooms in our house. This is our house. This is me, and this is my house. And I have access to all of these rooms. And throughout my life, I've had, they've been there. But as I've grown and matured and developed, I start to access some rooms less than others. So some they're locked, I don't even go there. And others I live in so much that I'm not even aware anymore of what's in that room. And I find that that metaphor works really nicely. And that the aim of the Enneagram is to start to become much more familiar with what is in your dominant room, the place you hang out the most. What are all the parts of it? Strengths, weaknesses, blind spots. You know, how aware are you of what is in this space? And how are you doing in starting to become aware of and let go of the weaknesses and start to move to the higher side of your type, the strengths, the beautiful qualities and gifts. Okay, so that's the introduction to the whole, all of them. And then again, we're not just one type, even though that you've come out as a dominant one, you're more than that. That's your dominant style. But we all have centers of expression. We all think in some way or another, we all feel and we all take action in our body or sense things in our bodies differently. So let's look at them. So now I do this differently. If somebody is at a lower level of integration and maybe is really nervous and anxious, I'm not going to talk too much about the other styles. They really need to keep their focus on getting to know what's in this room. So I'll make them aware of the others, but your starting point for the journey on this map is to start to work, to walk the journey from weaknesses and blind spots to higher strengths of your type. So we might start there. But mostly I do start with the centers of expression. And with some people, I'll just focus on their dominant center of expression. In other words, the tri-type. For other people, I might do a very quick couple of lines summary of, so let's look at your thinking center, 5, 6, and 7. And I very briefly say what, and particularly what motivates each. So not so much behaviors and characteristics and strengths and weaknesses, but what motivates a 5, a 6, and a 7. And then I'll ask the person, which do you think you came out the strongest? Which one resonates with you the most? And inevitably, they know which one it is, and they'll say what it is. It's the 6. And yes, in fact, that is what came out for you. I might spend a little bit more time on the 6, or I then move on to the other centers. So that what I'm developing there is the 3 dominant centers of expression. So, you know, your dominant construction is a 1, 2, 6, and there's a name for that. A person who displays or dominates in these 3 areas is the supporter. And then I would read the Catherine Fauvre description, and it really, really resonates with them. So sometimes for people that is the okay, you know, this makes sense. I can see myself in here, because it captures. It's firstly very brief. But it captures some of the nuances of my other centers and how those other centers influence my dominant center. Okay, then we hone in on, so we've now looked at the 3 dominant ones. And so out of these 3, the 1, 2, 6, the 1 is your dominant style. And all the way along, I'll be coaching. So I'm picking up on verbal cues, somatic cues, and tapping in. So I'm just noticing there was a giggle there on your side, or what was that expression about? Or that seemed to resonate somehow with you. Can you tell me more about that? So that they are flavoring the input with their reality, with, I can see how this shows up. Oh, yes, I always do that. People keep telling me this. So they're owning it. How am I doing with time, Getti?
You're doing good. You've got just under 5 minutes.
Oh, okay. Okay, so in terms of the dominant style, so the way that I talk about it is always looking at the purpose. Why are we doing this? What is the benefit of doing this? And the biggest benefit is self-awareness. So my coaching approach, an integral approach, is part of that is you can't have change just by thinking, oh, no, I wish I was less critical. I wish I was more patient. That change requires all 3 centers, like the ontological approach. I need to shift. I need to become aware of what are my patterns and habits in the way that I think, the way that I feel, the way that I sense in my body, and the way that I act. So self-awareness is the first thing that I need to become aware of. And then I need to put in place practices that start to develop new pathways and new neural pathways to create new behaviors. So the Enneagram is a way of learning about yourself more, where you are holding up another lens, and it is just one more lens. There's so many other lenses. Many of the execs have been through so many assessment tools. So how can you use this as a lens to gain more insight into yourself? And like Getti says, this is not telling you who you are. You are telling yourself who you are and who you are not, and where you dominate and where you don't, because you filled out the questionnaire. We are not telling you anything, and no one can tell you what you are. Only you can decide if it resonates or not. So the light is quite bad. Okay, so where people don't resonate with a lot of things. So if they resonate completely and wow, this is just so amazing, this is so me, there's sometimes less of a need to bring in some of the other sprinkles. Whereas if someone is objecting to quite a lot, and no, I'm not like that at all, or I used to be like that, but this is like me, but this isn't like me, then they need to know more about the nuances. So you are, yes, you are a one, but you are different to other types of ones. So there are three different types of ones, depending on what your instinct for survival is. And I might ask them, I might give them a little bit of a, if you find yourself on a desert island, what do you do first? That might be a fun way in. Or I describe briefly what those three instincts are and ask them, which do you think is your dominant one? So a self-preservation one looks a little bit different to a social one or an Essex one. And I refer them to page 11. And then I've got stuff around me and I might read little snippets. So I've highlighted stuff. And depending on me getting to know the person, also from their intake questionnaire that they would have completed first, I'm able to hone in on the bits that I think might help them to see their nuance, their uniqueness. Okay, so yes, that makes sense. I'm definitely this kind of one or this kind of an 8. And then I also talk about you are also flavored by how you relate to the rest of the Enneagram. So you've got 2 wings, so on either side of you. So I like to think of it as if you are a bird and if you were just a bird, your Enneagram 1, you wouldn't fly very far, just on the basis of what you've got inside your 1. The more you're able to access both of your wings, and then so that sometimes they get confused with the lines and wings and which is which. The wings are literally the things that come out on either side of you. So as a 1, the 9 and the 2 are your wings. So if I can start to access some of the good stuff in each of the wings, I'm able to moderate some of the worst sides of myself. Okay, thanks, Getti. And then I'd introduce lines as well. And the conversation, if I've got a contract with the person, I refer back to the Enneagram many times later and work with different aspects. Okay, that's me. My time is up. Thanks,
Awesome.
Getti.
Thank you so much. That was brilliant. Thanks, Karen. So please hold your questions. So we're going to do that towards the end. Let's go to Marlain now and have another unique approach. Thanks, Marlain.
Thanks, Getti. Thanks, Karen. So I'm just going to start by saying that I bring the Enneagram in as part of my coaching process with whoever I'm coaching, where I think it's going to add value, where it's going to be beneficial. So I don't actually use the Enneagram as a silver bullet, and it really does depend on what my client's outcome is. What is their purpose for coming for coaching? So it's really not something that is my silver bullet. And, I really focus very much on meeting my coachee where they are. However, when I have, when the decision is to actually use the Enneagram as part of the coaching process, and it will be different. And I want to just use an analogy that I often think of in terms of my approach before I'm going to do a debrief. Am I on a cruise liner with the person, or am I taking them out on a speedboat and bringing them back to shore? Because if I'm on a cruise liner, we're on a longer journey, and I can go into more depth depending on whether that is what the coachee actually wants. And that's really key. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the approach that I use when I'm on the cruise liner. But before I do that, I'll just mention when I'm taking someone out on the speedboat, I'll be asking them, what outcome are you really looking for from this session? And, if they say, look, I really want to understand myself more, or there's a particular aspect that I'm really interested in, that's what I'm going to focus on. So going back to the cruise liner approach. So firstly, when I send the report, I think the communication is really key. So if we're on a coaching journey, I will have briefed the coachee about the Enneagram and gleaned whether this is something that they would be interested in, that they would see value in. In the initial communication, when I send them the feedback report, I always recognize that for some people, it can be very, very overwhelming. It just depends where a person is in terms of their own growth journey. So I will invite them to take their time to read the report and digest the contents, and to highlight how important it is that the report resonates with them, and also really emphasize that we're far greater than any report, and that this really is an outline of an aspect of personality. I'll also just talk about the Enneagram type as being a template. And, that obviously there are many Enneagram types throughout the world, and that each has a different flavor. And I'll also, in my communication with them, suggest that they just be aware that the report might evoke emotion, because it certainly does. Recently I had someone say to me, I was completely in a state for a week, before we were actually doing the debriefing. So emphasizing that, that our type is a template, our individual backgrounds, our life experience, nature, and nurture have a huge influence on who we are, and we're far more than our type. And then I will talk a lot about, I'll give an overview of the Enneagram, cruise liner approach. And I will talk very holistically about the Enneagram. I'll talk about the background. I'll spend time giving them an overview of the system. I'll talk about the centers and the underlying emotion of each center, the meaning of the lines and the wings. So giving them a big picture. And because I'm Risa Hudson trained, I bring in many aspects from the Risa Hudson approach when the client is interested in more depth. And I will already share with them the layers of the Enneagram. So starting with a broad overview and then moving to narrowing it down. And when the coaching relationship is focusing on the development areas, and when we're working with the Enneagram specifically in this regard, I will encourage the client to identify maybe 3 specific areas that emerge from going through the report that they would specifically like to work on. And, normally those do align very closely with the coaching objectives that we have set prior to going into the Enneagram. And then I'll work through the report depending on the depth the client wants to engage in. And again, whether we are on the cruise liner or the speedboat. So I'll work fairly systematically with the client. I'll ask them which aspects of the action, thinking, and feeling patterns they particularly relate to and resonate with them, and which blind spots would be beneficial for them to focus on, just to get the discussion off the ground. And then they often ask about the worldview, the focus of attention, the core fear, the self-talk, and the vices. And I often find with coaches that there's a big resistance to the vices, obviously. Not many people are jumping up and down and saying, yeah, I resonate with the vices. So I explain a bit about the passions of the Enneagram, of each Enneagram type, and how the passions relate to the pain in the heart center, and how these manifest to cause us pain. And essentially, I give them a bit of context around that and calm them down, because now they're starting to think, well, this report is saying they're all about the vices. We discuss strengths and weaknesses, which ones really they relate to, and, spend time on weaknesses or overplayed strengths that are actually derailers for them in their life, or, in their leadership capacity. So in terms of the instinct, so this is an area of the Enneagram that I am particularly interested in. So I do give it a fair amount of context to this layer of the Enneagram. And I'll start by talking about the instincts, or giving an overview of the instincts, self-preservation, sexual and social, which are the Risa Hudson terms. And then I'll talk about the three bubbles for each. So with self-preservation, I'll give an overview of the one bubble being health and well-being, dealing with and having resources, nesting and domesticity. Talk a little bit about that, and I'll normally show a slide on that, so it's a bit more visual. If it's the sexual dominant instinct, about broadcasting, drawing others in, fusion of attention, seeking out situations with edge, and social being around bonding, making a contribution, reading others, and adapting. So I do spend time on this, not necessarily in the same session. So I normally ask people to allocate 90 minutes for the debriefing if we are in, a 10-session coaching engagement. And I find that that's a very important aspect, because often real self-awareness emerges in talking about the instincts. So I'll discuss the centers of expression, and there's often an aspect that coaches need to develop here. So we'll discuss that in terms of the growth path to integrate the three centers. So we're not traveling with a third of ourselves. So I'll often use the analogy, that if we're dominant on the thinking center and maybe not so high on the feeling and action center, we kind of navigating the world with a third of ourselves and looking at ways on how we can integrate all the centers. The level of integration, so I have touched a little bit on this. I really do prefer to work with the Risa Hudson 9 levels of development. And, again, this just depends on, how much information the person is interested in. And it is a part of the report that I grapple with. And I've often thought I should actually leave it out. Funnily enough, I actually haven't ever left it out. But I'll talk about the 9 levels of development using the funnel analogy and indicating that the lower we are down in terms of the levels of development, slightly the more reactive we are going to be. And the journey for all of us is to move towards deeper self-awareness and to move forward from the reactivity side. And Renata, I don't know if this is appropriate, but what I do is, once I've talked about the 9 levels of development, I will really focus and say, in terms of the integrative approach, this report is really focusing on the average level, comparing it to the Risa Hudson perspective. And, we're all really at an average level. It just depends where we are. Are we at the higher part of that or the lower part? Because, people get very freaked out, as has been mentioned, when they see, I'm at a low level of integration. Yeah. And, I'll also just say that it's an opportunity for us to grow our awareness. And then I'll say, well, which aspects do you really relate to in terms of that summary of low, average, and high. So that's kind of how I deal with it. It still hasn't landed in my body whether that is the optimal way of dealing with it, but that's the approach. And Getti referred to Keegan's model, and that I've also got that as a backdrop in my head in terms of how the person is coming across. So I will look at their strain profile, and that often kicks up a lot of stuff. And then engage in a discussion on the lines of release and stretch, and highlight that, we can relate to both, and that the theory's actually moved on from it being very specific in that regard, and we can access aspects of both. And then going back to the integrative training, Renata, that I did with you, I will speak about how it's a wonderful way for us to access, like if we need more eightness in us, and we understand, the type 8, how can we access more of that eightness in specific situations? And of course, when we have the mat, it's amazing to walk the mat and see the transformation that actually takes place. So one thing I do want to emphasize, I really do approach the debriefing also talking a lot about the Enneagram as a transformation journey. And, that it's not only about getting stuck in personality. And, I'm not comfortable with the whole teaching of it purely as a personality typology, because it's just so much more. And the journey is towards accessing the virtues and the holy ideas, even though, they're a little bit of my own true north, though I often find myself very much caught in my passions. And then, I also encourage the standard report. However, if we are doing a very detailed debriefing, I will obviously discuss the leadership competencies, what resonates on communication and giving and receiving feedback. The part that I do like to focus on is on the conflict styles. And, here I'll talk briefly about the harmonic triad and how the different types deal with conflict and what's coming up in terms of their profile. And, if it is a leadership coaching journey, it often enables people to really understand how different colleagues on their teams are responding to conflict. So, yeah, I think perfect. I've just put my full stop on. So that's pretty much the approach. And, thank you so much, Getti and Karen and Renata and Ingrid. And I definitely see a space for integrating the coaching report. I haven't done that, recently, but I see a space for that, again, depending on who the client is. So thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Marlain. It was absolutely awesome. And again, please note your questions down, hold them. We can have a space for them. Yeah. And now we're going to hear from Ingrid on her style and approach to it. So here's going to be some awesome learning. Ingrid. You're on mute.
Are we keeping all questions till the end? No one want to jump in with questions from my left? No.
Let's run. And
Okay,
then we'll have
can
the space.
you make me co-host so I can share? Oh, can
I did at the beginning.
Okay, cool. Okay, so this is part of a pack on coaching with the Enneagram. So step 1, I get the CEO to send an email giving some strategic context and saying why we're doing this. If it's a corporate client, obviously. So I help draft that email, and just so that the people know what's coming, there's some placement around the whole process. It doesn't just arrive out of nowhere. And the mail will say, expect an email from Ingrid. It'll have my bio and the process steps very clearly with deadlines for completion. And then I send a mail soon after that contextualizes as well. What is the Enneagram? Why do we use it? How are we going to use it? And there I make it very clear that there's a personal process that is individual and highly confidential, that goes into more depth around self-awareness. And then in the team process, we focus on, team communication, conflict management styles, problem-solving styles, etc. And then the link to the questionnaire and how to complete it. So I don't send the generic one, and I also use different reports. So I get them to complete it with, I emphasize the time frames and how to tap into their answers and diary booking link. And then when I send the report, I don't send them the coaching companion always, because I also really don't like the sections on levels of integration, faking good, faking bad. I just send the report and I use the CC in the debriefing session. If I do send a CC type summary, like if I use the Euphoria report, they've also got a graphical summary, and I like people to get that. But then I say to them, don't expect this to make sense. We'll look at it in the session. So it gets them curious as well. And when they get the report, I ask them to read it, accessing 3 centers of intelligence. So I'm already getting them ready for what the Enneagram is about. So I say to them, when you read the report, notice what happens in your body when you experience things. Underline things that evoke certain feelings for you, where you get a reaction. And also notice what imagery arises for you in your mind. If you have any flashbacks, memories, just make a note of it and read it very slowly, so that you can do this. Sorry, my cat's opening the cupboard. And then when I have the debrief with them, if I'm going to explain what the Enneagram is in this mail, I use things like this. So giving them the background that makes them feel safe, that it's about helping them to be responsive in the moment in a way that is kind of up to date and appropriate, not in a judgmental sense, but that we're not acting out of our past and projecting that onto the future. So it allows us to get closer to reality as it is on its own terms. So I like to, if I explain what the Enneagram's about, I sometimes use this. This is a Wendy Palmer quote, which I really like. And then in the actual debriefing, there are a couple of things that I do, always. Establishing rapport and trust. So just connecting with the person, asking them how they are, seeing, what I can connect with them on. Or if I've heard something about them, I'll say, oh, Arlene told me, something about their role, or just anything that sets them at ease, and just make them feel like this isn't going to be a stiff process, that it's really about them. And then making sure they know that there's confidentiality. I think that's all quite basic. And that they're entitled to privacy, that it's non-intrusive, and also that, again, the separation between the individual and the team process, that nothing they share is going into the team context. And then I also ask them, how do they want to spend the time to get the most out of it? So that creates the space for them to say, no, I'd just like you to explain the report to me and take me through it. And often the compliant types do that, or the ones who haven't read the report, or the Enneagram 5s often do that as well. They want to trick you into explaining the Enneagram. So they'll say, the coach-led option. So these are the 3 kind of options that people usually come up with. So the coach-led option is when they want you to talk them through the report and explain stuff, which is great, that's fine. So then it's got a more like textbook teachy kind of process. And there I do elicit information from the client about how they felt when they read it. But then I go into narratives and insights from past clients that have the same subtype and tri-type, and use the coaching companion there. If it's the client-led option, where I say, well, how do you want to spend the time? They say, yeah, this thing on page 6, and then they'll jump in and they'll start asking questions and they'll drive the process. So that'll be more, this is what stood out for me. I underlined this thing on page 3. Can you explain this? So then it's more them asking questions, and that they lead the process, but there are things that I always make sure get covered there. And then the last one is, it happens quite often actually, that the client has taken the test again and got their type wrong or just wants clarification. So that's more of an interview to help them see where they got confused. But for me, pretty much the most important thing of all is this trauma-informed approach. And some of you here have been on my trauma and the Enneagram course. And that for me is profoundly important, because the Enneagram is such a powerful tool, and it can, have a very shaming effect on people because of that ick factor. It can hit people really hard in terms of things that are bad about themselves, and people are already beating themselves up half the time. A lot of our identity is shame-based as it is. And I don't want clients to feel shamed by the Enneagram, and I don't want them to feel like the ego is something that they have to fight and kill. And I don't want them to feel objectified, that you are this type. So I've got a very, very strongly trauma-informed approach. And you also don't know who's in front of you. You can't assume anything about someone's background and what they've been through and why they've got the type that they have. So this is what part of being trauma-informed is about, is really appreciating what childhood patterns led to that person needing that Enneagram strategy. And this is something that I've learned a lot about from Tom Condon. And when we have a trauma-informed lens, we have deep compassion for somebody's type, because we understand that that was a very, very logical response to their childhood, that it was the best thing that they could come up with, that their defenses are so rational and so valid and so profoundly adaptive that, that we don't make them feel bad. Even if we're there for, we've been called in for some kind of remedial coaching, I just find that nobody changes because they're shamed and criticized. People change when you provide a holding environment and kindness and patience and validation. So I'd say that's pretty much the most important thing about my approach to debriefings, is that people feel attunement, safety, they feel understood, and to tell the person, you make sense to me. That's the implicit message, is you make sense to me, and that there's a deep wisdom in your adaptive strategy. So that's really, really important for me. I don't want clients to feel bad walking out of that session. And then the way I kind of frame the Enneagram, I always use the metaphor of maps. So this is different types of Google Maps about exactly the same place. So you can have the street level view, you can have the view that shows you where the nearest restaurants are, or the topographical view, or the street level view. And each type will have a very different perspective on exactly the same thing. So it's also validating the fact that we all see things differently, and that our type is a reality strategy that focuses on certain details about the world. So some of us are very focused on relationships. Some of us are focused on getting things done and that our Enneagram type is a lens on reality that helps us to make choices and solve problems, but it also excludes a lot of information. So we're walking around with one map and we're missing all the details that are on someone else's map. So preparing them for the team session around, you're going to have someone in the room that's seeing that, someone in the room that's seeing that, you seeing that because maybe you're, you know, Enneagram 3 and you want to get from A to B or whatever it is. So, or, you know, a self-praise 9 who, you know, wants to know where the food is, for example. No, I'm just teasing. But just so that they appreciate that there are going to be other people in the room who are seeing different things, and that everybody's perspective has a profound validity to it and is designed to solve certain problems. So kind of prepping them to be able to sit across the table from somebody who they've hated until that session, and having a new openness to difference. Give me time checks, okay, Getti, because you know.
Yeah, so let's check in on that. So 2 minutes remain, and we're going to give you another 5 because this is so awesome. So
thank you.
Go.
Okay, so let's see what's going on here. Okay, so in the client-led option, there are always things that I'll build in somewhere. And here I'm putting in the technical jargon, which I don't, I'm not trying to teach the client the Enneagram jargon, but I do talk to them about the patterns. So the Enneagram somewhere in the back of my mind, and they'll raise something and I'll say, yeah, have you noticed this sometimes? And have you noticed that under stress you become compliant, for example? So I'll have this stuff in the back of my mind and all the patterns of their type and their tri-type and their, you know, instinctual preoccupations. But I try and use it in more of a narrative way. So to use patterns from past clients and to say, no, another client who came out the same as you on this questionnaire said that. And sometimes I'll tell a funny little story and they laugh and they cringe and they, you know, over-relate. But these would be the areas that I would try and bring out. So it's definitely subtype. Absolutely the most critical thing is the instinctual preoccupation that informs the subtype, because the differences between the subtypes are so extreme. So that has to come out. In the coach-led option, I describe, you know, I map out what the Enneagram is, that it's a deployed strategy and not a built-in existential condition. So that's Tom Condon. And for me, that is so liberating, because you think this thing is baked in and you have to kill it and you're never going to escape. But when you realize that it's a strategy that you've been deploying your whole life, and you've hit some of the limitations and blind spots of that strategy, that you can start trying out other things experimentally. And that really helps people also not to feel ashamed. It's, you know, this is a thing. It's such a genius adaptation, but it's also got some limitations. And then looking at the strain profile, spoke about subtype being so important. And just also looking at what I debrief on here. So also using the coaching companion subtype, most important thing. And if I'm in a corporate, I use the Mario Sikora language, which is this. So self-praise is called preserving, transmitting is the sexual, and navigating is the social. And he's got fantastic paragraphs on each of those instincts, and in a corporate, what the preoccupation is. So preserving is with, you know, I say like running a tight ship, planning, budgets, reporting, infrastructure, IT, support functions. So it's much more relevant in a corporate environment to use Sikora's stuff, because, you know, at a personal level, you know, it's sometimes a bit difficult to apply to the work context. So I find that stuff really helpful. And then the behavior at work of those and the leadership implications of those instincts is really, really great, the way that he does it. And all his stuff is available on his website and online at the level good enough to use in coaching. So that stuff is super cool. And then I make sure I debrief the instinct trifix. That's what I call it. I had to come up with a name. But say this person is a social 6 and she's got a 1-3-6 trifix, I call it. I'm trying to not abuse Catherine's stuff because I use it slightly differently. But she's a social 6, social 1, social 3. It always plays out like that, that your instinctual preoccupation plays out across your tri-type. So I help them with that. But again, it's, pointing out some stories. I don't try and teach them the Enneagram. And then I explain there are 3 sections here. The colors here are the action center. The green are the feeling center, the heart center, how we connect. And the blue is our thinking strategy, which is how we think about problems and how we think about the world. And then I'll give them a mini tour of the types. So 8s are like this. You probably know someone like that. The 9s are more like this. And the Enneagram 1 is the one that you came out strongest on. And have you noticed this, that? So I'll do that for each of the centers. I'll say, do you know someone like this? And this was your one. So I give them a chance to also, again, they're getting a mini tour of the Enneagram so that when they get into the team session, they already have a good feeling about it. And they've laughed already in the session. They're like, oh my God, yeah. Rob is that. I know he is. And, I don't gossip with them, but I'll, they'll say, oh, I bet you the CEO is whatever when they hear this. So priming again for the way forward. And then I will go into this. I'll say, have you noticed that, you like to go along with things? And then I make the link that the social 6 is compliant in a specific way. So emphasizing that piece. And then the harmonic.
1 minute, Ingrid.
Okay. And then there are a couple of things I make sure I get through always. And also, like Getti, I show the tri-type summaries. I usually I hide the name because supporter kind of privileges the 2. And so I take out the name of the tri-type, or if I do show it, I sometimes let them rename it. And then I show additional information. I usually make my sessions 90 minutes, and I've got a lot of stuff that I've prepared. So I might look at the lost childhood message or whatever to help them see, the childhood narratives that inform their strategy. Like, this strategy is usually in an authoritarian household. I don't know if you relate to that, but I'll tell them some patterns from the childhoods and they'll say, yes, yes, amazing. And then in my mind, I'm exploring domains of wellness. So that's almost areas in which the centers play out. That kind of relates back to the strain profile. If you get a strain profile like this, then straight away I'll go there first of all. Is your strain profile came out high. Are you okay? What's going on with you? And sometimes use anecdotes, like when I've met people with this kind of strain profile, they've been going through a really hard time, or, just to normalize it. So yeah, that's a brief tour through my approach.
Thank you so much, Ingrid. That was absolutely awesome. So let me check with the group and with Renata. We've got 16 minutes left, and would it be best if we just had open question time in the space, or would you want to go into a group for a little while? No.
I think open question is fine.
Okay.
I have the first question. The one of your last slides, Ing, I'd love you to just show it again and just explain, because I missed Can't remember which one it was, but it looked really interesting.
This one.
No, go to the next one maybe.
Let's just see. This one.
No, the next one. The next one, slide 13. Yeah.
This is my little domains of wellness model that I invented, because I've been working with this kind of intuitively for forever, and I never put it on a piece of paper, but it's kind of scanning the person's chakras, like getting a sense. What's going on with this person? Where's the stuff? And then bringing in the Enneagram centers around that, like, you know, what's their state of mind? You know, Enneagram 6, they're out of touch with their clarity of mind. They're disconnected from their head center. Some people are not able to speak the truth. You know, they're repressing. And so just kind of getting a sense with them. And then in the
so am I understanding correctly? The bottom three, the instincts are in the body center. So that's what in IQ9 language, it's the action center. The top three are the thinking center, that domain, and then there's one in the middle, which is the heart.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So then I can explore with the person, when have you recently been triggered? What happened? What was your state of mind? People who've done NLP, they're all the submodalities, which are amazing. Like, what visual imagery was happening? How small did you feel? The boss felt huge. I felt tiny. So there are all kinds of distortions. So this you can unpack quite deeply. You know, if someone's got repressed SX, they've often, you know, in a low energy state. So yeah, I use that quite a bit, but not necessarily on a piece of paper. It's my check-in. Yeah.
So any other questions? Getti, what happened to you? All right, Getti's there somewhere.
So questions going back, Marlain, Karen, any like things that you're going to be walking out of here today with, any light bulb moments or things that you particularly like, or anything confusing?
Ingrid, if I could just say one thing that I thought as I was listening to the different approaches, which was so marvelous. Maybe at the absolute core of it for us as practitioners is the idea around do no harm. And that whatever we do in the interaction with the coachee is profoundly respectful of them, that we hold them as legitimate throughout the process. And that seemed to be like such a beautiful thread in the way that people spoke about the different way of debriefing. And then I had a strong sense listening to the other approaches that this idea of helping people use the Enneagram as a doorway into development, and an unthreatening one. So, you know, the idea of, for me, like just working with my own thing, when Karen told me like the vice of the two was pride, I was like, no, you got the wrong guy, man. You know, so really that idea of not leading people with shame, so much better also if you can be light of touch and a little bit humorous, but also being careful with that, you can hurt people by mistake.
Yeah. So just before we go to Donnell's question, I wanted to also just speak to exactly what you spoke to, Getti, is the languaging of the vice comes from Oscar Chazo, for whom English was not his first language. So pride and envy and gluttony and deceit are not in the, you know, an avarice, not the traditional understanding. And so that needs some translation and explanation from us to our coachees if they read those words, because on face value they go, I'm not envious, I'm not deceitful, I don't have lust. Why did you write that I have lust? I once had a guy say that to me. And it's, for me, it's about trusting my intuition. I'm not there to ram anything down the person's throat. So when the person says to me, I don't give to get, that's not true, I say, okay. If I feel intuitively that the person's up for a little bit of probing, like, well, if you give and give and give, and you do, eventually the person starts taking advantage and they don't even send you a WhatsApp saying TX for thank you,
Then what happens? I go, oh, then I get so angry and I cut them off. And I say, well, if you were really not expecting anything in return, then maybe that's your clue. But sometimes I intuitively get that this person's not ready to look at that or accept that or take that on. And if they go, I don't give to get, everything else in the report's true, but that's not true. I had a 7 last week who said, everything in the report is completely me and accurate, but I do not avoid pain. Outright throughout. And every now and again, we'd be going through something and I gently introduce the concept in a different way for maybe it to be more accessible. No, doesn't avoid pain and suffering, but everything else is true. So I'm okay, that's fine. That's cool. We're going to work with the team. And so, I'm happy if you think you don't avoid pain and suffering. We're not there to ram it down anyone's throat. We meet them where they are. Donnell, you have a question?
Yeah, I just want to share an observation and ask a question. So my observation in this was how powerful and interesting and how much I've just learned hearing different people's approaches. Like I feel like every single person I'm like taking notes and I'm pulling something really powerful and new for my debrief. And it made me reflect on one of my next steps out of this is to go hire one of you guys and start experiencing different coaches with my own Enneagram type, because it's just so interesting to hear how different coaches are playing with this. And then my question is around the coaching companion. Those of you who've been comfortable sending it out. And again, I keep going back to the second page. I've had a few situations where when you get to the very bottom and it talks about the validity, like how valid it is and how long it took the person to take the report. And so, maybe it's valid, maybe it's not. I'm very curious with those of you who have experience, like, has that come up and how have you addressed that? So I'm just very curious where that sits in kind of the just debrief.
Well, I think that would make a case for not sending that second page or sharing it. I personally don't ever send the coaching companion, but I might show the first page on the screen in Zoom or a printout if it was in person, perhaps. But again, even the page in the report that speaks to levels, I don't go there. I just say, oh no, don't worry about that. I don't think it's very accurate, and I just dismiss it. So if somebody had to see that piece about how long and whatever, I would just go, don't worry about that. It's not serious. It's not.
Awesome.
I don't even look at it. I wouldn't get into a big whole thing. I don't know if that answers your question, Donnell, if you'd like.
Well, let's go to, in order, Janice, Fiona, and then Amanda. So Janice, you kick off.
Just as an observation, just the timing alone is, again, you can use some humor with that, because you will often find that a 7 will take 3 hours or 2 days to do the assessment, because they do it a little bit, then they go away, then they do it a little bit, and then they come back. So often that's that is an accurate report. So then you can laugh about it with the client and say, this is a very accurate report and this is why. So I use that.
Thanks, Jan. Brilliant. Okay, awesome. Let's go to Fiona.
Talking about the levels of integration, someone in our breakaway group reminded me that you can actually exclude it from the report. So I've always just done the full pro or the full standard. I've never thought to pick the different sections out, but I think it does give it down to that level. So I've realized that actually I don't like it after listening to all of you guys today, that it does cause more confusion and concern than anything else, and has not really been useful. So next time I request a report, I'm going to make sure I uncheck it.
Awesome, Fiona. Thank you very much. I know I'm going to be in trouble next week. Amanda and then Sylvia.
Yeah, I just chip in there. Lots of people choose to not send the levels of integration. That's a very common thing. You can suppress that when you're ordering the report. I'll just say I've never suppressed it, and I've only once ever had a person question it about being low integration. Otherwise, I just don't speak to it to talk about it in the session. I do find, irrespective, that the development exercises, and that's the reason why I keep it in, that little development exercise piece on that page, those are gold.
They are.
That's why I leave it in.
Oh, they are awesome.
Worth it just for those.
Yeah. So just this going to Amanda, I just want to say that in the nearly 1,000 or more than 1,000 I've done, I've not had a single person who felt mistimed. And that also says something about this amazing, amazing tool. Let's go to Amanda and then Sylvia. And then I think we're going to close.
Thanks, Getti. Renati actually linked right into my point there. And Janice and Cara and Jane and I had a really cool discussion in our breakout about closing out a session. You know, we've spoken quite a lot about what we do in the session, but there's also all this information that we've now kind of just delivered to the client or to the coachee. And then we were just talking about various strategies of either tying a little neat bow on it for that session, or you know, how they can do homework, and those little developmental boxes we found, or I found, are quite useful, especially if the client hasn't really retained a lot of information. It's been too much for them. I just say to them, go and look at those and it'll kind of jog your memory. But I was wondering if anybody had any kind of pearls of wisdom on closing out and how to kind of just close the loop for either that session or a series of sessions on a report.
Thanks, Amanda. So I think one of the things that's critical in any coaching session is closing. And generally what I find helpful is to ask the coachee if they'd like to summarize or draw out points that were important for them, and getting a sense from them of like what next steps could be. You know, how would you like to use this? And I will always offer the self-observation in a coaching assignment. So like, how can this be helpful for you in your self-observation? What might you be looking for that perhaps is something you're not really aware of at the moment? I think finding a good closing is critical. And apropos of that, I'm going to go to Sylvia and then we're going to close.
So it looks like leaking may had an answer for that question. Love to hear from you, Lee.
Okay, Lee, go for it.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I sometimes get a little bit concerned with the debriefing and true coaching, because I think they're two different processes. For me, true coaching is completely client-centered and it's not content heavy. Debriefing is. And I think it's helpful just to remember what it is we're actually doing, and to be true to that process, because this is very content dense.
Yes.
And I think we need to be authentic about that and say that to the client.
Yeah.
So that we know what we're dealing with. You know, I think it's dangerous to try and you know, just not be in ourselves, not be clear that debriefing is debriefing, and a true coaching center, if we're looking at the ICF and the MCC competencies, is client-led.
Yeah, that's absolutely beautiful, Lee. Thank you. They're two different things, in fact. And what Karen said that was helpful is she uses a coaching style in her approach to debriefing. So very clear it's debriefing. And what you say about content heavy is absolutely right. And it's not client-led. And I thought Ingrid's distinctions there around 3 different ways was subtle and interesting. But thanks for that, Lee, so useful. And let's go to Sylvia as the last question, please.
Thank you. This was really informative. And I thank all the presenters, because for me, what I learned today is that at least have a metaphor that helps to explain. I mean, with all of them, they've had beautiful metaphors that you can really use. And once you use that, the people will stay, when they leave, they remember that metaphor. And I also like what Ingrid was saying about, you know, it's a transformation, because I saw it myself when I did my own assessment. I mean, Renata was one of my coaches at the time, and it transformed my life. So I think that feeling with what I felt after that session, and when I go to my clients, I also want them to have the same feeling. They may not agree with everything on the report, but it transforms, it changes their lives. Thank you.
Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you so much. And I think linking to what Lee was saying is, this is a really, really helpful tool. And having more tools in our toolkits as coaches can be really, really helpful. But what is really profoundly helpful this afternoon was seeing that there are different ways of doing it, but there's strong threads around do no harm, compassion for self as the coach and for the person you're working with, and that profound sense of a sacred exchange where you offer somebody in perfect confidence an opportunity which they may or may not choose to take. And how magical is that as we go on this journey of ever developing, ever learning. And I think something important for me is just encouraging the coachee when discomfort calls, try and stay with it. You're going to be okay. What can you learn from the discomfort? And often going into the body. So thank you everybody for an absolutely lovely afternoon. Focusing really on praxis today rather than learning more in depth. And I think it'd be lovely if we could do a bit more of this in the future. To Renata, who just unbelievably holds this community together with such a light touch and so much work. So thank you so much to you, Renata. To Karen, Marlain, and Ingrid, thank you so much for sharing your awesome skill and knowledge with us. And from me, a huge privilege to show up in front of you with my offer. And I loved the experience very much. So
Getti,
Renata,
thank you so much. Yeah, thank you
close.
so much, darling. What a gift. And I feel like we could do another 2-3 hour sessions on this topic and still get lots of value. And just so Getti, I do the easy stuff, the sending of the emails. Ingrid does in-depth presentations and research. I mean, what you saw today was a little taste of what you get from Ingrid. So I think Ingrid has single-handedly added so much value that people keep coming to the sessions, and also handles the Facebook page, because that's not my strength. As a 7, that networking is much, she's much better at that than I. So I just do the easy admin parts. So yeah, I think we probably could do definitely another session on the same topic next year and invite a few more people and allow Ingrid another hour and a half of the session, because she could talk about that. So I love that, you know, all the familiar faces, that this really feels like a family gathering once a month. So just beautiful to see everybody. Thanks for being here. You know, I'm not sure, Ingrid's usually available to stay later. Inge, I don't know if you're willing or wanting to stay. I live in an apartment now in Cape Town, so I have to take my dogs for a walk. So I'm going to depart and make Ingrid host. But we are at the end of our time together. So just everybody who contributed with your questions, Marlain and Karen, thank you too so much for your generosity and for being willing to share your immense wisdom. And look forward to seeing you. Oh, next time, our November session. Ingrid, give us a quick punt. What can we expect from Trauma and the Enneagram in November?
Yeah, I forgot about that. Just giving an introduction to how we can use the Enneagram to work with trauma, and a bit more about this trauma-informed approach. Yeah.
You don't want to miss it.
You don't want to miss it.
And then I also just wanted to say thank you, Getti. You set such a beautiful tone, and the compassionate presence and the spaciousness that you create for the client. I'm very, very grateful. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. Beautiful afternoon.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, I've also got to go. So thank you.
Bye. Bye, everyone.